Welcome to an all-new episode of Hearthstone Hypotheticals, a show where I pretty much ask my Hearthstone Twitter some kind of question and we get to see what the Hearthstone community believes about a particular topic. And today's topic is the weirdest card in Hearthstone. Weird can be about the card's art, effect, or use in the deck. Best and funny answers will be featured in a future video. So let's go ahead and dive into the weirdest cards in Hearthstone, according to my Twitter, of course. And before we get this started, I just want to give you guys a quick reminder that there is a giveaway that I am doing for 2 mega bundles. You guys can have 2 different chances of being able to get one for free. Information on that will be down below in case you guys want to enter the giveaway. But all you have to do is just check out the Twitter and it has all that information. So let's go ahead and dive into some of the weirdest cards in Hearthstone. Michael is saying that this question was difficult because there's a bunch of, he doesn't just want to put in a bunch of bad cards. But here are his quick answers. He's got Academic Espionage, Star Aligner, Voodoo Doll, and Lowalker Cho. And out of two of these cards, I would say Voodoo Doll and Starliner probably see the most amount of play. But he's saying that there were strange builds around these cards that had niche decks that actually saw play around them. Only really a thing due to Frostless Jaina, but I'm assuming it's what he's talking about with the Voodoo Doll here. But anyone who has ever seen Cho's effect go over the course of multiple turns definitely knows. But yeah, there's a lot of weird interactions that some of these cards have, and all of these cards have been at least playable in one deck that I have actually, played a lot of before. Academic Espionage sees a lot of play in Spectral Cutlass Rogue, so there's a lot of different ways of being able to take effect of that. But other than that, this card has been a very weird inclusion in your decks unless you're trying to outpace or last somebody in terms of resource management. And unfortunately, there's just not a lot of rogue decks that can take advantage of using other class cards, even if they're 1 mana, because you have such a wide array of cards. And some of them could be bad. Worst case scenario, you get a 0-cost card that costs 1 mana, and then you're just stuck with a worthless card. Starliner, definitely another weird one because the 7s all line up perfectly. But this card definitely saw play in a Starliner Druid deck that became way too relevant to where it had to be knocked down a peg. Voodoo Doll, I've really only seen in the Frostless Jaina mage deck, to where you would just literally play this as a 5-mana removal, but you would also get a 3/6 if you had the Frostless Jaina Death Knight equipped. So this is the only deck I've really seen Voodoo Doll in. Maybe there was a Warlock deck that kind of took advantage of this because of Voodoo Doll and Defile or Mortal Coil. But even then, Warlock didn't even really care about using Voodoo Doll. And then last but not least, Lowalker Cho, I have used in a few memes myself, and a lot of people have definitely taken advantage of this card through random means. But I mean, unfortunately, the one thing that sucks about Lowalker Cho is the fact he's got 0 attack, so it's really easy to just remove him off the board before he gets any kind of value. But regardless, these are definitely some of the weirder effects in Hearthstone, because we had one card that just adds a whole bunch of stuff into your deck, one that has a very, very specific use for 7-cost minions, one that you pretty much have to kill, and then another card that doesn't become useful unless your opponent literally gives you the use out of it. Rocket Panda is saying that he feels a little bit better after I learned the lore, but still, his submission is Millhouse Manastorm. And I actually don't know the WoW lore, but I'm going to go ahead and take a wild guess that Millhouse Manastorm at one point either betrayed somebody or literally did something to where he was trying to improve his own team, but it ended up helping the opponent out some way or another. Because there's got to be a reason why he has this bad of an effect to where this card would be printed. Millhouse Manastorm. Enemy spells now cost 0 next turn. If you're aware of what Druid can do, Druid can literally FTK you if they were given this kind of effect as soon as their turn starts. But regardless, this card is definitely weird in a playable sense, because why would you ever want to give your opponent this much initiative? And it's just I would actually like to know the lore on this, so if you guys know what's going on exactly, why Millhouse Manastorm has this effect, feel free to let me know in the comments below. But I'm gonna have to look this up after this video, because I just don't understand why he needs to have this bad of an effect. Steve left us a list, but we're going to go ahead and cover this one last because it has a lot of different ones that I actually have a lot of talking points about. So we're going to go ahead and check out Glacial Mysteries from Matcha Dog. 8 mana, play all of your mage secrets from your deck and onto the battlefield. And it's just it's the definition of why was this printed. In fact, we already know the reason why this was printed. It was so mage would have a worse discover pool. That's pretty much the only justification people can give to a card like Glacial Mysteries. Because unfortunately, this card is just so terrible, the only real way that you could ever get value out of it is if you've waited for 7 turns, haven't drawn any of your secrets, and then you're like, you know what, I could thin my deck about now. it's about turn 8. I can commit a whole turn to playing all of these secrets. And when you think about it, if you play more than 4 secrets, it does get, the mana cost value. You pay 8 mana for 12 mana's worth of cards. And if you, pull a 5th card, then that's 15 mana worth of cards. But the point is, like, you don't want to waste an entire turn to have your opponent play around secrets, especially if they know what they're doing. And plus, you have to commit this entire package to where if you draw it, it significantly weakens it. So unfortunately for Glacial Mysteries, it was just so weird and so unplayable that it never had any sort of application except for a Mark McKay-Z clickbait video to where he actually won with only secrets. And I'm pretty sure this card was also in the deck because, I mean, it does count as a secret card. But he is really the only person that I've ever seen actually physically play this card. Fellow streamer and co-caster Wicked Good is talking about Surrender to Madness. This has definitely got to be one of the weirdest Priest cards that has ever been printed, because not only is Priest destroying their own mana, which is something we've never really seen for Priest. This is more of like a Warlock thing. But it also gives all of your minions in your deck +2/+2. Not all minions on the field, not all minions in your hand, all minions in your deck. This is another great example of what I think Hearthstone was trying to do at the time by printing cards that would just be bad for priests, so that way the Discover pool would be somewhat weakened. But unfortunately for this card, it was so terrible, it was just a dead card. I think, okay, so I've actually done one OTK with this card. And the only reason why it's an OTK is because I had to do it against the Innkeeper, because there was just so many times, there was just so much animation time that I had to wait. But it was essentially a Mindrender Illucia combo to where I played this card over and over and over again, played Insight in order to get a 0 mana Boar from my deck, so destroying my mana crystals really didn't matter as long as I had, like, the way to be able to play all my cards, and everything was 0 mana. I'll include the clip here so that way you guys know exactly what kind of combo I'm talking about. But it's one of the coolest combos that I've ever performed in terms of just like making this kind of unplayable card see play. But other than that, I have not seen anybody touch this card. I have not seen anybody want to use this card because unfortunately it's just way too weird. Minions and Priest really don't need to be buffed +2/+2 for a 3 mana buff that destroys 3 mana crystals. My god, give this to Druid or something. Give it to a class that can ramp. This does not look like a Priest card, and is part of the reason why, like, this is just such a weird thing for Priest to ever get. The Pinnacle is talking about one of the weirdest Shaman cards ever printed, and this was before they were given any Frozen support. In fact, this was the expansion they were given Frozen support. But Moorabi, whenever another minion is frozen, add a copy to your hand. This is another weird card that I've only had like one interaction with, and it actually featured in a trolling clip. I will see if I can get that clip on there for you guys, but essentially what I was doing was an infinite Moorabi combo because I had a Glacial Shard in my deck, and I was able to copy Combo Vine, I think, over and over and over again. And I also was able to find a Grumble in the mix, so the clip will give you guys the context. I can't 100% remember what happened, but regardless, Moorabi is just a card that was so left field that Shaman got a whole bunch of other cards to support it, like Cryostasis, and I think there was one other card that, yeah, it was a 5 mana 2/7, where if you would attack it, it also had Taunt, where if you would attack it, it would freeze a minion. So it's just like, I don't know, dude. Shaman freeze mechanics are not necessarily a bad thing, but you give Shaman a legendary, you give it a 6 mana 4/4, and it also has an ability to where you need to support it in one way or another, so it doesn't even stand by itself. If this was like a battle cry, where it's like, if you were to pick a minion and freeze it and get a copy of it, then that would be playable for a 6 mana 4/4, because not only are you freezing your opponent, you're also getting immediate value out of it, so that would automatically give Moorabi a reason to see some play, because not only are you stalling your opponent, but you're also stealing a minion. So I really don't know what Hearthstone was thinking with this particular card. Back in the day, they were often vocal about how they can't make every single legendary game-breaking, because not only is that bad for balance and design, it also makes it more difficult whenever they print cards like random legendary minions and stuff like that. So even though that effect wouldn't really affect how bad the random legendary pool is, it's still just something that I would like to see Hearthstone maybe do in the future whenever they're designing cards, to not just make a 6 mana 4/4 have such a bad ability to where you can't even play it as stats, you can't even play it for its ability, and you need to put some of the worst cards in the game in an archetype that is just not properly supported. Benny is talking about Savory Deviant Delight. And yeah, this is a card that definitely reminds me of Demonic Projects, except it's a rogue card for some reason. Transform, really weird for rogue to do, a minion in both players' hands into a pirate or a stealth minion. So I actually heard a little bit of lore behind this particular card, because I think what happens is you get this item and you get to choose between pirates or ninjas, where like you either get to become like part of the pirate crew or part of a ninja squad. I don't 100% know the context behind it, but that is the reason why it's a pirate or a stealth minion, because you're essentially either you're eating this fish and you're becoming into a pirate or a ninja or something like that. So that's the reason why this text is very weird for a rogue card, because it's trying to fit thematically with something in the World of Warcraft universe. If you guys know what I'm talking about, feel free to explain it in the comments, because like I said, I don't play World of Warcraft, so unfortunately I just don't understand the lore that comes with a lot of these cards. But if that's the case, not only is this a flavorful looking fish, but that is a flavorful text to go with a nice inside joke from the World of Warcraft universe. But from its actual applications in Hearthstone, unless you're like transforming like a combo piece or something like that, that's really the only thing I can think of to like make this card useful, is because a random pirate or a random stealth minion is oftentimes going to be a 1 to 3 mana card, and you really don't want to do that to a lot of your cards, let's be honest. I mean, if you are transforming minions in your hand, they gotta be pretty bad to start with. So it's like, not only do you have to like find ways of getting other minions, which Rogue can definitely do, especially in Wild, but it's just not well supported in terms of it being like top tier. But regardless, very, very flavorful card, very weird because of its effect being in Rogue of all classes. But if they're going to keep making cards like this that are very, very flavorful in World of Warcraft lore, I'm perfectly fine with Rogue getting a transformation card every now and again. The next reply is coming from Mao, and he is saying that it is clearly Kindly Grandmother because it's a worgen disguised as a granny, yet it's labeled as a beast. And this is something that's actually pretty interesting, because if Kindly Grandmother actually is a worgen, and just looking at the card text, you can kind of tell that it is kind of weird that all the other worgens are not considered beasts. Maybe there's like a few other cards that I'm excluding here, but now that I'm thinking of like Raging Worgen, and I think even like Worgen Greaser, all of those cards were not like, or even like the stealth card, the Infiltrating Worgen. I think it's a 1 mana 2/1. Yeah, 1 mana 2/1 with stealth, and it also was not a beast. So it's kind of interesting to know why this card specifically was printed as a beast, but probably because it was a 2-drop, and when it was first printed, Hunter just needed ways of being able to synergize with their beasts, so having something that would stick would definitely fit that problem that they have. But but in terms of consistency, it's very weird that this particular Worgen is a beast and all the other ones are not. Baku the Moon Eater is talking about Kresh, the Lord of Turtles. Everything from its name, effect, and the fact that there are 6 numbers on this card make it the weirdest by far. Kresh feels like a card from another game. So let's just go ahead and go through his ability real quick, because this is definitely a mouthful. So first off, he's a legendary beast for warrior as a 6 mana 3/9. He has Frenzy, meaning if you damage him, he will gain 8 armor. And after he dies, he gives you a 2/5 weapon, which is called the Turtle Spike. So yeah, that is absolutely a ton. If this card was also a taunt, I think it would definitely fit up there with like the most amount of just stuff in Hearthstone, because there's actually a lot of cards that have like keywords and stuff, but this card has so many different things going on for it. Not only is it a beast, so you can I think Warrior has one way of taking advantage of Beast synergy, but I might be wrong on that. But yeah, it's a 6 mana 3/9, absolutely massive body. You can sometimes make copies in Warrior, not very effective though. But regardless, when you have things like Sulthras, or the Overlord that keeps bringing it back over and over and over again, or I'm sorry, Overlord Surfang, not Sulthras. Surfang keeps bringing this back over and over and over again, and it's just like a really weird interaction how like this card is meta, and it actually sees a lot of play in a good way, because getting 8 armor continuously is not only decent, but getting a 2/5 weapon and having a 3/9 minion is just so much. And for 6 mana, dude, this card does kind of feel like a mouthful, and does sort of feel like it's from another game. Or like what this comment said, like, yeah, it looks like some dungeon run aspect of like a card, where like you would see this against like a boss or something, they throw it down and it's like, this is actually the boss you're fighting, but it's him in his minion form or whatever. But yeah, Kresh is a really interesting card, and it's weird that he has this much text, because kind of like what Baku said, there are 6 numbers on this card, 6 different numbers. And that's not really something that we see a lot in Hearthstone. We see simplicity in our card design. But it's not saying that I'm not saying this card is bad by any means. But it's definitely interesting. But it is 100% weird compared to all the other cards that do exist in the game. Neriel is actually talking about that one legendary that is stealth that becomes a copy of the next minion your opponent plays. Never understood that one and do not even know the name. He is talking about Harbinger Celestia. This is another useless card that comes into a discussion a lot whenever I make Hearthstone hypothetical questions, mainly due to the fact that this card is just so bad and a lot of people always remember it for being so useless because it was printed in a lackey meta to where the best decks were playing lackeys, and every single time you were to play this card, you would just get a 1/1 lackey that did absolutely nothing. So pay 4 mana to not only skip your turn, but to get a 1/1 minion. Yeah, that does not sound like a good card to me. The only way that you can really use Harbinger Celestia is like maybe against like a control deck if they don't have ways of finding random minions, and back when this card was printed, that just was not the case. And nowadays, it definitely can't see play in Wild because they have access to literally everything, and there's just so many aggro strategies that it just will not work properly. But Harbinger Celestia is a weird card because I feel like it's just another legendary that they printed in order to make legendaries, random legendaries, really, really bad whenever you had a Brightwing or something. And so they didn't just automatically win the game because legendaries are not just supposed to be powerful minions, they're supposed to be thematic and have these really weird interactions and effects. So Harbinger Celestia definitely fits the bill on weird effects in Hearthstone, and unfortunately, it's just so useless that its weirdness will also be labeled as useless. El Tinho is talking about King Togwaggle, and it looks like we got a quote here. I think that actually comes from King Togwaggle. I can't really do his voice, but I will do my best to try and do this in some kind of weird voice, so just bear with me for a second. Let them come and loot our realms. Let them come, steal boots and helms. Listen to my lamp, you unwashed gaggle. We'll take measures, steal their treasures, and give the best to me. That sounded more German than I wanted it to be, but we'll just roll with it for now because I've tried that like 4 different times, and unfortunately, Togwaggle just has a weird voice. But regardless, this is definitely one of the weirdest cards in Hearthstone because this was, I think, the first time that we ever got an ability to where you could swap decks with people permanently. Like, that was actually unheard of at the time and really dives into what Hearthstone can do as an electronic card game, and that's the reason why I absolutely love Togwaggle. All it does is enable a different kind of way of playing the game, and it literally makes you think about another aspect of the game. Now suddenly you have to worry about your deck being swapped, so you have to play out all of your cards, or at least try to draw as many cards as you can, so that way your opponent cannot take advantage of them. And Togwaggle was very relevant when it came out during the Kobolds of Catacombs meta, because Azalina Soul Thief was a card. Yeah, the Witchwood came out first, so Azalina came out, had absolutely no applications. Then suddenly Dream Petal Florist and King Togwaggle worked hand in hand very, very well in order to enable Azalina Soul Thief to where it was a ridiculous combo to where you can not only steal your opponent's deck, but you would steal their hand. And yeah, this is just a really weird effect. There's no other deck that really has rung true like this except for other Togwaggle decks and whatever Mindrender Illucia can do, because it's pretty much the same thing except for 1 turn. But leaving Mindrender Illucia aside because it gets referenced in every single video, it actually wasn't replying this one, so that makes me a little bit happy. But King Togwaggle definitely gets the reward for being some of the weirdest but awesomely designed cards in Hearthstone, just because interacting with your opponent's deck to that degree is epic. And here's the last reply that we'll go over today, but it's a list of 10 cards, so it's definitely going to take us some time. But some of these were some of the weirdest cards I've ever seen in the game, so I just wanted to try and talk about them a little bit. And of course, Mindrender Illucia is on here, so it does make yet another list by itself. Every single video has had Mindrender Illucia, but let's go ahead and jump into the rest of these. Archivist Elysiana, a 9-mana 7/7 that was originally printed at 8 mana, by the way, so Baleful Banker worked perfectly with it. But it was discover 5 cards, and you would put 2 cards of every, you would put 2 copies of every discovered card into your deck, essentially refilling your deck with 10 cards. And this card was absolutely massive during the Control Warrior meta, where all you wanted to do was just to outlast your opponent, remove, and then play Archivist Elysiana to just give yourself even more turns into fatigue. And if your opponent did not have this exact same card, they would just die infinitely to fatigue, because there's nothing that they could do since you have 10 more cards in your deck. And if it just comes down to resource generation, sadly the person that has not taken fatigue is going to win the game. But Archivist Elysiana enabled such insane late game play strategies that a lot of people negatively remember that meta because of it. Murozond the Infinite, a priest 8-mana legendary. I think it's 8 mana 8/8. to where it plays all the cards that your opponent did. So if they played like a hero, you get that hero plus the hero power. If they played any minions, you get the minions. If they played any spells, they get the spells. You just don't get battle cries and like death rattle effects. If you like play a card that like activates a death rattle effect and you yourself don't have those death rattles, you don't get the exact same effects your opponent does, just the exact same cards. And that's another really weird card because unfortunately in Hearthstone, when Priest has mechanics like that, it gets very, very frustrating. But when it's on an 8-mana beat stick, it becomes a little bit more of a setup, and your opponent has ways of being able to, you know, use their mana and cards to get rid of whatever you play. But Murozond the Infinite was weird in terms of being able to have to remember what you played in the previous turn to not enable your opponent to have some kind of insane swing turn. Archbishop Benedictus, yet another priest card. I think it's a 7-mana 4/6? Yeah, 7-mana 4/6 that gives you a copy of your opponent's deck and adds it to your deck. So another card that's very similar to Archivist Elysiana to enable these late game strategies that go on forever, and unfortunately Archbishop Benedictus just really doesn't see that much play unless you're playing a very specific Reno build, but this card can kind of screw up your Reno cards a little bit, so you really don't see it all too often. But it's a very interesting effect that we may never see again, because I don't think that players really enjoy these cards that extend the game this long. And if you are in the control matchup, it's very, very cool, but unfortunately, I don't think that there's a lot of people that really enjoy control matchups. I feel like that's like a very small percentage of Hearthstone players, me being one of them. I actually enjoy having a very nice attrition battle to where decisions take a large amount of play in whether or not you're winning the game. But regardless, Archbishop Benedictus, say that twice as fast and see how you do, is unfortunately just a card that is a little bit too slow, has a very unique effect, but it's very frustrating to go up against it, so some people just don't want to play it for that reason. High Priest Thekal, a Paladin legendary, is actually a card I took advantage of a ton, and it has one of the most unique effects in Paladin I have ever seen. It literally converts all of your HP into armor. All of your HP except for 1 gets converted into armor. So from 30 HP, you go to 1 HP, but you have 29 armor, so you effectively play a 3-mana 3/4 do nothing. But the key thing to think about here is that this card was printed when Shirvala was a card, and Paladin had a lot of new heal cards that were added, so you could essentially double your life total throughout the course of the game if you were to play this card on turn 3. But the cooler thing about this card was how it enabled amazing turn 2 boards with Molten Giants. If you had Coin into Thekal double Molten Giant, that was effectively a turn 2 lethal that your opponent could not clear unless they had a way of dealing with 2 8/8s, and that is just not doable with a lot of classes unless you're playing Shaman nowadays with the removal that they have with Ice Fishing. But Thekal only saw play in like 1 or 2 decks. Unfortunately, he wasn't like the go-to for Paladin because its effect literally was a 3-mana do nothing unless it synergized with your deck. But I had a lot of fun with him. He was a very weird take on a Paladin legendary, but I would love to see something that pushes the design space a little bit more like Thekal did. Next up is Patches the Pirate. My god, we are going through a lot of these, and so far they're just getting weirder by the second because when you look at Patches, it doesn't really look like a Hearthstone card. It almost looks like okay, it does look like a Hearthstone card, but it doesn't look like a constructed card. It looks like something you'd see at a PvE or something like that, to where you would just have to go up against a bot or something. But Patches was a pirate that would literally pull himself from the deck and was key for aggro decks because not only did it technically thin out your deck to where it would increase your draw quality, but it would also just give you another minion that could attack immediately. And that attack was very, very important to the point where they didn't just nerf Patches to the point where he didn't have charge anymore. They didn't even give him rush. That was just out of the question, because being able to have that kind of initiation when you already have a 1-drop as well is absolutely massive when that's not what the card is supposed to do. Like the Hunter card that deals 1 damage and summons a rush minion. That's supposed to be like that because you're splitting up 2 damage for 1 mana. But when any deck can take advantage of pirates, like we've seen in the past, Patches was just way too good. It's a very weird effect for sure, because we really haven't seen anything like this to where it's minions that can pull themselves out of the deck, essentially recruiting themselves. But if they have any other cards like that, they just can't be meta-defining like Patches was at one particular time. The next card is Mindrender Illucia. You can see the sadness in my face, because this is the weirdest, most frustrating, most anything card. This card is always going to be in conversation because it fits every single freaking category of anything in Hearthstone. It's the most Hearthstone-y Hearthstone card to have ever exist. It's the most frustrating card. It's the coolest card. Like, there's so many situations that Mindrender Illucia has been involved in to where weird is the only nice thing that I can say about the card, and maybe people will finally agree with me and say, Clark, you're a little bit salty, but I'll finally give this to you because weird is a perfect way of describing Mindrender Illucia. I never want to see this card ever printed again. I never want to see anything like this to where it interacts with your opponent this hard, and as a combo player, I'm personally offended, and I took offense to that, and it's just like, I'm not all about it. So Mindrender Illucia definitely gets points for being one of the weirdest cards in the game, but I would like to not see it in the future, Blizzard. Please don't hurt me. Next up, we have Yogg-Saron, Master of Fate, which has definitely got to be one of the weirdest cards to pop out of Dark Moon Fair, but there were a lot of weird cards in terms of card art and wacky effects. But Yogg-Saron, Master of Fate has probably got to be one of the weirdest cards because it's the only minion that has a literal chance with like a wheel that you can spin. And it does something completely different depending on what your odds are. Not to mention that it has the possibility of rolling and doing nothing, or if you haven't played 10 cards, then it's just a 10 mana do nothing. So hopefully you're not playing it like that, or you're getting that unlucky. But regardless, Yogg-Saron has some of the weirdest effects in the game, from being able to eat the entire board, steal your opponent's minions, summon an entire board full of minions for both players, kill one player with freaking pyroblasts, and then there's one that I'm forgetting because I never get it. Oh yeah, the random puzzle box and the one that gives you spells in your hand. So those are all the effects from Yogg that are, depending on what situation you're in, can be very, very helpful. And even yesterday, I had a situation to where I literally got the one that adds 0 mana cards into your hand, but I had 9 cards left. So I only got 1 card, and I thought at first it would be really unlucky until it ding 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 was a soul mirror, and it literally won me the game. I could not think of a better spell that could have won me that particular game, but sometimes Yogg just knows. He's a weird little guy like that, but sometimes you just got to put your faith in him and just trust that the weirdness is going to win you the game. But Yogg-Saron definitely has, you know, the randomness to it, which makes him very weird indeed. One of the only cards I don't understand on this list is Vulpera Soundrel. I don't know if it's because of its card art or if it's because of its effect, which is, you know, being able to discover a card or being able to pick a random option if you don't like those cards. So being able to get a mulligan on Discover is actually kind of interesting. I don't really know if I would go so far to call it weird, but in terms of its ability being the first like it, of being able to just like find like a random card before like Guidance and some of these other cards came out, I think that Vulpera Soundrel was actually good for the design space of making a Discover card that was actually somewhat cool, but is not going to see play in every single deck because Discover is not that powerful. Like, at least on this particular card, Discover is good on a lot of cards that do additional things, but when it's just on a 3-drop minion to where you kind of sacrifice some tempo and it's not freaking like a Scorpid that has poisonous and can kill everything, then that's a example of a well-balanced Discover card in my opinion. But I don't think the Vulpera Soundrel is that weird compared to a lot of the other cards that we're seeing outside of the random aspect of the card. The next card is Elise the Trailblazer, which is unfortunately the least that I probably play the least amount. It was a card that would essentially shuffle a pack into your deck, and as soon as you draw the 2-mana pack, you can play it and then get 5 playable cards from the Ungoro expansion. And I think every now and again, it actually had a very good chance of giving you a legendary minion. So sometimes you would get these really, really cool cards, but every now and again, they wouldn't really function with your deck very well. But it was very, very similar to how the Golden Monkey used to work, except it didn't replace your entire handed deck with legendary minions. It just gave you more utility. Sometimes this would be worth the while in Control Warrior because you just wanted extra minions, and this was before, I think before Archivist Elysiana was printed. So there was definitely a lot of like attrition that could be fought for if you wanted to play this card, but every now and again, like the minions you'd get would be kind of underwhelming. Like, unless you got like some Direhorn hatchlings, you really didn't care about a lot of the cards that came from Ungoro unless it was removal or something. But extra resources could always be useful, but in today's time, Elise the Trailblazer just kind of falls out in the test of time. It's a very cool effect and a very unique effect, and for that definition, it's definitely weird because it's the only card that we've seen that shuffles a pack into your deck and gives you those playable cards for a bit. Sadly, you don't get to keep those cards. I think that would be absolutely cool, but that might be a little bit over the edge in terms of, you know, trying to sell packs and whatnot. But a very cool card indeed, and maybe one of these days, if they want to print a card like Elise, maybe they can give you one card that actually gets added to your collection. That'd be kind of cool for a design. Not really sure how the devs would think of that, but I still think that's pretty cool. And then last but not least, there is Zephrys on the list. There was one other person that said Zephrys, and it was just a giant fuck you attached to it because there's a lot of negative emotions that come with this particular card. There's a lot of things that Zephrys can find, and not only is he the weirdest because he has so much utility, but we literally don't understand how this card thinks. He is his own entity, and every now and again, Zephrys will just find us a card that we could not even possibly think of, and I'm not gonna lie, every now and again I think Zephrys is just a little bit drunk because, good lord, he just finds some of the weirdest applications, and he's got a fixation on Temple Enforcer. Like, let's be honest, he's got a problem and a fixation with Temple Enforcer and Tyrian Forge Ring, and every now and again he's got a fixation on Jaraxxus, but in the games where I don't want to play Jaraxxus. But he's definitely a weird card because he's one of the only cards in the game that literally is so versatile to where you can play him in almost any situation. You need healing? I got healing. You need removal? I've got removal. You got a big minion that you're trying to find? Let me give you an Earth Elemental. You'll be overloaded, but you get the point. Zephrys is one of the weirdest cards to ever exist in the game, and I'm not sure if the design team is going to put it on themselves to make another card like Zephrys because of the headache that it takes in order to keep this card working properly, because I can't even imagine how many times Zephrys needed a bug fix or a hot fix. Like, there was a lot of things that could be problematic with the card, because when you're wishing for a perfect card that's very, very dependent on a situation, it's very subjective. I mean, it no longer becomes subjective, it becomes very objective on whether or not Zephrys is good or bad and pulling the good stuff. So Zephrys the Great needs to make sure that he stays great in that aspect, but I don't think we're ever going to see another card like Zephrys just because the design team doesn't want to put another headache like this on their plate. And honestly, I could understand that. And that begs the question, what does Clark believe is the weirdest card in all of Hearthstone? And well, I'm going to take you guys down memory lane real quick because I want to show you a card from the alpha days. And this card was removed from the game for the right reason. You'll see right now because it's Auto Pecker 4000. Just read the effect. This was a legitimate card that was made in consideration for being in the actual card game. But yeah, 1 mana 1/1 Auto Pecker 4000. Deal 1 damage to any player who mouses over this minion. Every time you mouse over it. So if you do this over a minion and you accidentally hover over it 30 different times, you are dead. And I think that's absolutely hilarious, and it showcases what Hearthstone was trying to do with its original design philosophy of being able to really hammer in on being an electronic card game. So you can't do this in an actual card game. Like, you can't mouse over a card and take damage. That is just absolutely unheard of. You can't be like, oh, can I read that card? By the way, you lose 1,000 life points every single time you have to read my card text. Like, what kind of anime BS is that? But regardless, I find it hilarious that this was the design philosophy that Hearthstone was trying to go down, to where it really wanted to hammer in the electronic media aspect. But we'll never see a card like this because its applications with mobile would be kind of weird. Plus, if you already know what this card does, it's literally just a 1 mana 1/1 that does absolutely nothing, because why would you mouse over it unless you're just like a habitual gamer, and then suddenly you're going to feel bad because your opponent got some free damage in. Which is another reason why I feel like this card was taken out, was because it doesn't feel like a fair Hearthstone card to lose to. But I mean, it's not like you can like force your opponent to mouse over it, and it also works for you as well. So think about it. If you actually have to buff this minion, that means that you have to take damage, and if you're like really thinking twice about whether or not you want to buff it, you're going to be accidentally hurting yourself a lot. Or if your opponent wants to clear it, that's another way they'd have to take damage. Every single time they attack into it, they'd take damage. Like, the more I think about this, the cooler it actually is. So it's not just about like memes and being able to like mouse over it like this. Like, every single time it becomes a target, it deals damage. So maybe that could be a way that Hearthstone could bring this card back. Every single time this card is targeted, deal 1 damage. And it could either be to the player or to the enemy hero. I think if it was to the enemy hero, it would work way too well with cards like Libram, like the Librams. Libram of Wisdom would just absolutely break a card like this. But if you were to make it to where every single time any player targets it, they deal 1 damage, then suddenly it becomes a lot worse to become to buff this card. But regardless, really, really cool card. Really, really interesting design philosophy behind it. I would like to see something like this in the future in terms of being able to just really push the game to its electronic limits. But that is going to do it for today's episode of Hearthstone Hypotheticals. Thank you guys so much for making it to the end of this video. If you do enjoy this content, feel free to like this video. Feel free to subscribe to the YouTube channel to be notified about any other future uploads we happen to come out with. I have a lot of different videos that I'm currently working on. I'm hammering out a lot today in terms of these future Hearthstone Hypothetical videos, as well as a Nord's Dormo video that I will be editing as soon as I get that footage. So we're going to be going back to some gameplay videos coming pretty soon. I'm just kind of burnt out with the Forge and the Barons expansion, and I really enjoy what we're doing with this Hearthstone discussion-based content. So feel free to let me know what kind of cards you think are the weirdest on Hearthstone, and we got even more questions that are lined up on the Twitter. So feel free to check out the Twitter, see what our most recent question is, and if you want to see your own reply in the future, just go ahead and comment on that thread, and I'll see what I can do to get you on a future video. But regardless, thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully we'll see you for the next episode of Hearthstone Hypotheticals, and hopefully we'll see you for the next video.